Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Coach Prime, Colorado, heading into the 2024 season, into the Big 12. Want to take a look at this Colorado depth chart, take a look at the 2024 schedule, and kind of project this team heading into the 2024 college football season. Now, where I want to get started with this Colorado team is just kind of acknowledging some simple truths. And you get a lot of people, national media talking heads, getting up and kind of just overcomplicating the sport of college football sometimes. You look at this Colorado team and say, heading into the Big 12, they have the best quarterback in the conference in Sheduer Sanders. They have the best pure football player in the conference in Travis Hunter. I think the large argument against this Colorado team as well, they really struggled in a lot of aspects in the 2023 season. There's not a single Colorado fan that's necessarily disagreeing with that, right? The front seven on the defensive side of the football struggled specifically with depth. You look at the offensive line, we all know that was nowhere near where it needs to be. Now, the big question is, Colorado got better at a lot of spots that they were not good in 2023. I think the question for us to figure out is how much better did they get? And that kind of determines what this Colorado team can do in 2024. But at least from my opinion, I understand this is a little bit of a hot take. I think it's wild that a lot of people are kind of sleeping on this Colorado program, coming in 11th in the media poll rankings with, again, the best quarterback in the conference, the best college football player arguably in the country in Travis Hunter. This Colorado team can do some damage. Again, considering, and we kind of got to figure out right now, and that's what we're going to do over the next couple of minutes, kind of figuring out how much better did they get in the spots they needed to get better. Fired up to get into this conversation. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. And doing these preseason previews, it's one of my favorite kind of episodes to do. One, I get to learn a ton from you guys in the comments section. I think more importantly, it's just a blast to kind of put your stake in the ground, call your shot heading into 2024. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into this Colorado program now. We've taken a ton of different looks at this roster over the last couple of months. The Colorado fans that have been rocking with the boys, I don't think there's any more ways we can look at this Colorado depth chart to kind of sum it up. You have Sheduer Sanders, who, again, we've talked about extensively, at least in my mind, a top 3 quarterback in the country. I think the best quarterback in the Big 12. You have a wide receiver room that I kind of want to dive into a little bit more, where you go back to 2023, it was a very strong wide receiver room. Obviously, guys like Travis Hunter and Jimmy Horn Jr. come back. What I think is most fascinating is I think they added some type of pass catchers that they needed to go out and get. Where you look at Colorado's wide receiver room in 2023, it was a lot of short area quickness. It was a lot of guys that can operate with the football in their hands, but there wasn't a ton of kind of wide receivers that could really excel working vertically down the field. You had a true freshman, Amarian Miller, kind of show some flashes. But again, he was a true freshman in 2023. What did Colorado go out and get? They got some guys that know how to work vertically down the field. And you look at Sheduer Sanders, who has a phenomenal deep ball when he's attacking the deeper third. I think Sheduer Sanders now has some pass catchers that he's going to be able to push the ball down the field for. You look at Jimmy Horn Jr., you look at Travis Hunter. Those are the guys that kind of operate in those short intermediate route trees. You want to get the football into their hands quickly. You're bringing Will Sheppard from Vanderbilt, and 6'3", 200-plus pounds, has done it at a high level in the SEC on a horrible Vanderbilt offense. I think Will Sheppard injects some of that big body boundary wide receiver that can work vertically that Colorado kind of didn't have in the 2023 season. You expect a jump from Amarian Miller, who flashed as a true freshman. Then you look at Cordell Russell. I think he might be the most fascinating wide receiver in this room. I am sure the Colorado fans have seen the offseason pictures of what Cordell Russell looks like. If he can play up to what he looks like, that's another fascinating wide receiver in this room, a very highly coveted kid coming out of high school. And then you inject LeJontay Wester, who might be the leading receiver for this Colorado program. Everything you read out of spring practice, what you saw in the spring game, him and Sheduer Sanders, that's going to be a very powerful wide receiver quarterback battery. Now, I think the biggest question mark we don't have that many question marks about this Colorado passing attack, but we do have some question marks about the offensive line in kind of 2 different scenarios. One in pass protection, right? It was an offensive line that obviously struggled. 10.5% sack rate on Sheduer Sanders' dropbacks. That was 124th in the country. They completely revamped it. And I think the difference between Colorado's offseason transfer portal usage 12 months ago versus this offseason was they kind of fill it up with guys that, one, have played a lot of football, but more importantly, guys that were coveted by a lot of Power 5 programs. You look at Justin Mayers coming from UTEP. This was a guy that had multiple Power 5 offers in the transfer portal, comes to Colorado. You look at Tyler Johnson. He's played at an extremely high level at Houston, was one of the better interior offensive linemen for that Houston team in 2023. You're bringing Khalil Benson at right tackle, who has started 2 seasons at Indiana at the tackle spot. And then you're bringing true freshman Jordan Seaton at left tackle. So I start looking at this offensive line and say, all right, Tyler Brown, we kind of know what he's going to be. We have a lot of confidence that he's going to be a really quality interior offensive lineman. Hank Zielinskis kind of taken over during spring practice. I think he's going to be the starting center for this Colorado program. Justin Mayers, Khalil Benson. I think the big question mark that you have this year with Colorado's offensive line is a little bit less are the players good enough? We kind of think the players are good enough, but I think it's a little bit more the continuity and chemistry. And there's a lot of new faces that are joining this Colorado offensive line. Can they play together as a unit is probably the biggest question mark. And kind of another thing I would add to this Colorado offensive line is they're deep. I mean, you look at Colorado struggled in the months of October and November because they kind of lacked that depth. And when it got to week 8, week 9, week 10, when guys were getting banged up and you had to go to your 2 or 3 deep, Colorado's 2 and 3 deep wasn't good enough. You talk about someone like Tyler Johnson, who is maybe going to be in the 2 deep for this Colorado offensive line, a guy that was a 2-year starter at Houston. You feel better about the depth of this Colorado offensive line. I think the last thing you got to talk about is the run game. They averaged 2.3 yards per carry last year. That was 133rd in the country. If the offensive line gets better, we have confidence in the running back room. Quite frankly, you go back to 2023, I don't think the problem was the running back personnel. I think a lot of the problem was the offensive line just not moving bodies off the line of scrimmage. You bring in Dallin Hayden from Ohio State, a guy that I've been very vocal, I think can be a really good football player for Colorado, given some more touches. We saw him have an exceptional freshman year at Ohio State. True freshman Michael Welch also getting a lot of buzz during spring practice. If this offensive line can get it going, be a little bit more physically imposing, I think the run game is certainly going to be there in the 2024 season. I think it's all contingent on this offensive line. We feel pretty good about the talent level. Now I think the question is, does this unit come together and kind of play as a unit? You go to the defensive side of the football, again, what was the biggest question mark for Colorado last year was the front seven. Teams were running the football very successfully on them, and that was, kind of the recipe for teams to beat Colorado, where it's like, hey, we think your offense is really good with Sheduer Sanders and company. We're just going to run the football and keep Sheduer Sanders off the field. Teams were able to do that and have success against Colorado. It is a completely revamped front seven, and it starts with the defensive line. You're bringing Chidozie Nwankwo from Houston, who I think is not going to be a guy that stuffs the stat sheet for Colorado, but a guy that's going to be a force on the inside, command double teams, let his linebackers play a little bit more free and downhill. You look at the edge position, I think, one, it's much better from last year, not only from a run defense standpoint, but from a pass rush standpoint. And Dan Hayes, BJ Green, 2 guys that probably could play on Sundays right now had they wanted to, coming in through the portal. You add some really good depth with guys like Samuel Okunlola, Keaton Wade from Kentucky. I look at this Colorado defensive line, and say, not only is the talent level much better, and I think Dan Hayes, BJ Green, Chidozie Nwankwo would probably be the best 3 defensive linemen on that Colorado defensive line last year. Then I start looking at the depth and say, I feel kind of good about the 2 and 3 deep as well. And so again, I think the question is, how good can this front seven be for Colorado? That's probably the question I have. I want to give a shout out to Nikhai Hill-Green, a guy that I know quite well. I think he's going to be a really good linebacker for Colorado. Then you look at the secondary and say, the talent was there. At times they gave up the explosive play. I don't think you're going to see the passing attacks in the Big 12 that you saw in the Pac-12 last year, but kind of having your 2 safeties return in Silman Craig and Shiloh Sanders, I think that certainly helps a little bit of the, the chemistry and everyone being on the same page. I mean, you saw a lot of busts and coverages because you just had so many new faces back there. I think returning your two starting safeties, guys that have played a lot of football for Colorado, I think that certainly helps in terms of not giving up explosive plays. So you kind of round out this conversation with regards to Colorado's depth chart and say, hey, we got some really top-end talent. I mean, Sheduer Sanders, Travis Hunter, they are going to be guys that are playing on Sunday. You can say the same thing for guys like B.J. Green and Deion Hayes on the defensive side of the football. We also think that the depth, specifically on the line of scrimmage on both sides, gets better. I think, again, the question is how much better kind of determines how good this Colorado team can be in 2024. You get into their schedule, it's not an easy schedule, in conference or out of conference. I mean, you open up with North Dakota State, who, again, Coach Prime kind of gave his respect to North Dakota State as being one of those teams that has been really dang good in the FCS. Now, what excites me about this matchup, which I expect Colorado to win, make no mistake about that, you're going to get a feel for how physical this Colorado team is, because if there's one thing that North Dakota State challenges FBS teams when we see them jump up, it is line of scrimmage play, running the football. This is one of the more hard-nosed teams that you see in the entire country. We're going to get a feel for how Colorado can hold up against along the line of scrimmage against a team that is going to try to just out-physical you along the line of scrimmage. Now, the reason I'm such a believer in Colorado winning this football game is because I just think the talent on the outside, the speed, the athleticism, I don't know if North Dakota State can quite match that. But what I'm going to be looking at, regardless of the score, is how Colorado looks along the line of scrimmage on both sides. Because, again, North Dakota State, if there's anything they excel at, it's line of scrimmage play. You go on the road to Nebraska next week, 6.5-point underdogs. I kind of said I like Colorado's shot. I mean, you take a look at just, again, kind of simplifying the sport, Sheduer Sanders versus true freshman Dylan Rolo, who I have a lot of confidence in. You kind of favor Sheduer Sanders in that quarterback matchup. You go on the road. That is one of the hardest places to play in the country. That's going to be a fascinating matchup. You go on the road to Colorado State. I think that should be a win. Baylor at home should be a win. On the road at UCF, another very tricky team to play, especially on the road. The big matchup here is, can Colorado stop the run? I mean, this is a UCF team that has KJ Jefferson, RJ Harvey, Penny Boone. They are going to run the football, control the line of scrimmage. Can Colorado be better against the run? Because if they aren't, it's hard to see them going on the road winning that football game. But if they are, and they are able to neutralize what UCF is going to be doing from a rushing attack standpoint, you kind of like Colorado's ability to go on the road and potentially win that game. Again, I think the fascinating storyline with Colorado in every single one of these games is they're going to have the best quarterback on the football field. And when you have that, I'm a Buffalo Bills fan when it comes to the NFL. When you have someone like Sheduer Sanders, I always say this with Josh Allen, when you have a guy like that, you always have an opportunity to win football games. Going into the bye week, then you go Kansas State, again, a team that I'm very high on. You go on the road at Arizona, Cincinnati, Kansas State, Arizona, for sure toss-up games. I might even favor Kansas State early on in this process until I see what Colorado is in the front seven at this point. On the road at Arizona, a fascinating quarterback duel where there's going to be a lot of points put up on the board. Cincinnati, that should be when you go off. Then you go on the road to Lubbock, Texas. Utah, Kansas, Oklahoma State to round it out. Again, you are playing North Dakota State, Nebraska out of conference, and then you were playing, in my mind, the three best teams in the Big 12 in Kansas State, Utah, and Arizona. I would maybe throw in Oklahoma State and Kansas. I mean, you're playing the top teams in the Big 12 in the 2024 season. But again, I think you go back to, it's really hard for me to sit here and count Colorado out when you have someone like Sheduer Sanders, when you have someone like Travis Hunter. I think the big question mark for this Colorado team, and it's kind of hard for us to really make projections until we see it on the football field, is how much better do they get along both sides of the line of scrimmage? Because if they take those steps and they have a solid offensive line, we're not saying this offensive line has to be a top 5 unit in the country. We just need it to be solid. Because if you give Sheduer Sanders a solid offensive line, a solid rushing attack with the playmakers he has, this Colorado team is going to put up points. And then on the front seven, I mean, if you can just be solid and stop the run, not really let teams grind you down like we saw them do last year. Again, this Colorado team is going to be in it for a lot of football games. I think one of the more exciting teams in the country heading into 2024. I know I had some hot takes in there. I would love to hear from you guys in the comment section as well. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.